It's time for another podcast by George. Straight talk, straight from the heartland, that'll have you saying, "By George, I think he's got it." Now, here's George.
Hello, hi, how are you? And welcome on in to another podcast by George. Going to have some fun today. We're going to be talking about UFOs, or I guess some people are calling them UAPs these days. And we've got an expert on podcast by George, and I really like this perspective. It's, because I'm a contrarian, I'm kind of a cynic when it comes to some of these things. And when it comes to UFOs, we are what we are. We've got to put everything in our own personal context. And with me, it goes all the way back to like Project Blue Book that our guest will remember. And I, back in the 60s, and I got interested in it as a kid in UFOs. And I think I figured this out. And I saw a report where an assistant deputy sheriff in Oklahoma had gone on the record confirming that a UFO had been seen down there in Oklahoma. And I went and told my mom, and my mom looked at me and said, "George, some of the nuttiest people in the world are assistant deputies in Oklahoma." I said, "Oh, okay, Mom," and I remember I'm from WHO, and as a kid I grew up on the farm listening to WHO radio, and they had this Hillary Queen's Minute Mysteries, and I'll never forget this one episode. These two cars collided out in the country, and one driver said that he couldn't see the other driver, and they said, well, he obviously was at fault because it was on the plains of Kansas, and everybody can see for miles out there. Well, it was in August, and the corn was 7 foot tall, right up to the intersection. So, you got to look at those types of things and those stories. And maybe the greatest conspiracy theory in American history that I talk about on my podcast all the time, Lee Harvey Oswald. It also reminds me of this. Again, when I was a kid looking into this stuff, the National Enquirer, of all places, came out with this blockbuster that Lee Harvey Oswald was found to be left-handed, and the 6.5 millimeter Mannlicher Carcano rifle that he used to shoot Kennedy from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository had a right-handed bolt on it, required a right-handed throw, and so obviously Oswald could not have used that rifle to have killed Kennedy and gotten those shots off that accurately and that quickly. And they went to the Marine Corps. He was a marksman in the Marine Corps, number 1, number 2, and they interviewed a commandant, and he says, "We don't make left-handed rifles." If you're going to shoot in the Marine Corps, you're going to be right-handed. Well, okay, that's my introduction. That's going to get us to our guest today, and it's Mick West. And for folks that may not know, I'm going to read this bio and give it a little bit of the long form here to start with because it's his first time on the show. Metabunk.org is run by Mick West. Discussion topics tend to focus around the bunk in 21st century topics such as 9/11, claims of false flags, recent claims of pseudoscience, and modern manifestations of the New World Order theory like Agenda 21. Mick's a retired video game programmer. He co-founded the company Newsoft Entertainment, is responsible for the Tony Hawk Pro Skater series of games. He's trained as a private pilot. He's flown a 400-mile trip solo. And Metabunk.org, I encourage everybody to check that out. It's purely out of personal interest of Mick's. Nobody pays him in any way. And you can contact Mick at metabunk@gmail.com. Well, apologize for that long intro, but Mick, welcome on into a podcast by George.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, that was a fine intro. It covered all the bases, I think.
Well, yeah, maybe getting back into the Wayback Machine that I like to do here. We're talking about, and everybody's seen these reports that are coming out recently, and 60 Minutes had a big report out. A lot of folks saw that. President Obama, he was on the Late Show and got this spooky-looking blank look on his face when they asked him about UFOs and the military and all that type of thing. You write that the deluge of media reports from 60 Minutes, the New York Times, and others about UFOs, also known as unidentified aerial phenomena. That's the UAP that they're calling these things now. Mick says it's difficult to make sense of this. He says, has the government admitted that UFOs are real? What are all those different blurry videos? And what's this UAP report that's maybe coming in June. And Mick says the 3 videos that partly drove this were vaunted as prime examples of official UFOs. Claims were made that they showed impossible physics or evidence of advanced technology, possibly anti-gravity warp drives hinting at aliens. Mick, I had to laugh when I read what you wrote there about the warp drives and the anti-gravity stuff. I mean, that sounds kind of like Star Trek to me.
Yeah, well, it does, but it's also something that people take very seriously. And I think, it's something you've got to realize is that the people who are interested in this topic are genuine in their belief. A lot of the people who think that UFOs are a real phenomena actually think they might be something like a warp drive, something that's like altering the very fabric of space-time as we know it and using that to move around. So it sounds kind of like science fiction, but some people say that science fiction is just the history of the future.
Yeah, I know some folks, and some stuff in Star Trek did come to pass, actually. But let's talk about the reporting on 60 Minutes. Now, I know that you saw that. I was sitting in my living room watching it. It made me think of my mom, going back to my intro there. I'm like, where's the other side of this? I know there's a contrarian point of view. There's somebody that would love to debunk this, but it's not presented. And I came away from that scratching my head thinking, oh, maybe there's something to this.
Yeah, well, I think kind of what they were presenting was what they see as the other side. They think that the official story of the government or everybody and scientists is that UFOs are not real. And so they're presenting in a way, excuse me, they're presenting a point of view that's opposite to that. So in a way, it seems like it's almost like investigative journalism. But what they are presenting is very much not grounded in the evidence. There are a lot of things that they present as being evidence, like these videos. There's 3 videos that were released a few years ago. There were 2 more that were released fairly recently. One of them was this green triangle video, which initially looks really, really interesting. Like all of the videos, they look like there's something amazing when you first see them. But when you delve a bit deeper into them, you see that they're not that amazing. And this green triangle turned out to be something fairly mundane.
Well, let's talk about the mundane here, because we've got those 3 videos, and I know you've taken a close look at all 3.
So there are 3 main videos that people talk about. There's one called FLIR, which relates to an incident on the USS Nimitz way back in 2004. So it's a very, very old thing, 17 years old. And the video itself has actually been out on the internet since 2007. So it's not like there's this new thing that's just suddenly cropped up and the government has released this video. This was a video that came out many, many years ago. It shows just a little black blob off in the distance that really doesn't do anything very interesting. People try to make the case that it's actually moving around and doing all these zigzags and everything. But when you actually analyze what's going on, you go frame by frame, you see that what's actually happening is that the camera is what's moving. And when the camera moves, it looks like the object is moving, obviously. And this is responsible for everything that happens in this one video. So that's, the one video that people often vaunt as the most interesting one. That one, doesn't really show anything at all other than possibly what is a different distant aircraft. Then there's 2 more videos. There's the Go Fast and Gimbal. The most interesting looking one of those is the Gimbal video. And the Gimbal video actually looks like a flying saucer.
I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah. This is the one that gets everybody going, and it's one that they show quite often. It looks like a black flying saucer kind of flying along over the top of this cloud layer. And then it kind of slows down and then kind of does this weird rotation. So it's standing on one end and then does another little rotation. So it looks incredible. It looks like something that's impossible for a human-made craft to do, because planes have to maintain some kind of level angle, otherwise they just drop out of the sky. So we know it's if it's what it looks like, it's not actually a human craft that we could actually do. It represents some kind of advanced technology. Excuse me. But again, if you look at the video in depth and you analyze what's going on, like little clues tend to pop out. We're looking at this infrared video, and if you look at when it rotates, you actually notice that there are other things in the scene that rotate at the same time. So what you're actually seeing is kind of like a light pattern that's rotating at the same time as the object in the middle rotates. which leads to the idea that maybe this object isn't actually rotating, because how could it affect these other lights which would be miles away that are moving with it? So perhaps it's just an artifact of the camera. And then you kind of go down that path a little bit. You investigate that a little bit more, and you find out that what it looks like is an infrared glare. When you're looking at a very, very bright light, like if you have a flashlight and you shine it at your camera, or you try this at home, you can shine it at your cell phone, shine it directly at your cell phone camera, and you will see a glare that's a lot bigger than the flashlight itself. It obscures everything behind it. And I think that's what we're seeing in this video. We also see it rotate, but I think that is just simply because the camera has to rotate itself. So the glass of the camera is rotating relative to the horizon. So it rotates. And you can replicate this yourself. You could take a piece of glass, like I've got this camera filter here. If I put it in front of the camera and I shine this through it, you can see that if I rotate this glass here, you can see that the shape of the glare is rotating.
Yes.
And that's essentially, I think, what is happening in this video. It's just a rotating artifact of the camera. And then finally we get to the Go Fast video. It looks like something that's really impressive. Looks like it's something that's moving very, very fast over the water. But you do the math on that, which is very, very simple. It's this high school math. Like if you can't do it, you could probably find a teenager who could do it for you. And you just tell them it's this far away. This is the hypotenuse of the triangle. This is the angle down. And this is all numbers that are on the screen. And this is the altitude of the plane. So what is the altitude of this object? You can just do the very simple math. It's like two numbers multiplied together and subtract another one. And you get the altitude of the plane as not being down by the ocean, but actually being really high up, which means that the apparent velocity of the object is almost entirely from the velocity of the plane flying back and looking at the camera, looking at it with the camera locked onto the object, which means it's not moving very fast. So all three of these iconic videos that have been shown over and over again on national TV all have very mundane explanations.
A guy like you with your background, how you're a smart guy, obviously, I can tell that just by listening to you. But I mean, you can see through this. You come up with these critiques and analysis. Why aren't these other folks doing? And I go back to the story that I told about my mother and the assistant deputy sheriff down there in Oklahoma, or whatever the case might be. I mean, that guy really did believe that. I'm sure that he did. Do you think that these folks that are reporting these incidents, I always use this description on my podcast when it comes to politics. Are they too dumb, or are they in on it? Do you think most of these folks are just mistaken?
I think they just don't make the effort. I think a lot of these explanations that I just gave to you require a little bit of mental effort to understand what's going on. The rotating glare one especially, but even the others, it requires going through things step by step. And because it requires a bit of effort, and because it's only me, basically me, Mick West, saying these things, they tend to defer to other people. And so you get these other pundits who have already spoken out, like the people who leaked the video. The most recent guy was this Jeremy Corbell guy who's leaked a couple of videos, and they put a spin on it and said, this is a transmedium sphere descending into the ocean, when it's nothing of the sort. Or, this is a flying pyramid, when it's, again, nothing of the sort. But because, the first guy who puts out the story is the one that gets all the publicity, he's the guy that they listen to. But I think they are starting to do a bit more due diligence here. And I think this is something we will see continuing over the next few weeks, is that they will actually look into things in a bit more detail. And they will see that there are these alternative explanations that are relatively mundane, and you don't have to jump towards advanced technology or aliens as an explanation. And hopefully that will come out more over the coming weeks.
Well, and speaking of the coming weeks now, this release in June, what is it that's coming up in June, and what should we expect from that, if anything?
Well, back at the end of last year, in the coronavirus relief bill, of all things, they kind of shoehorned in a little bit of language. They put in all these little riders in these bills that mandated that I think the Office of the Inspector General, or was it the Office of Naval Intelligence, I think, and various other people had to produce a report on the UAP issue. Now, the UAP issue from the Navy's point of view is essentially that sometimes things fly into their airspace and they can't identify what they are. And they know that the vast majority of them are things like planes that are far away that just happen to go in a little bit into the airspace, or they're things like drones, where someone is flying their drone and they fly it over a military base for fun, or perhaps they're flying it over a military base or over a battle fleet to spy on it. So it could represent a real security issue and perhaps even a security threat. So there are these very, very real issues. And then on top of that, we have the issue of sometimes pilots see things in the air that they can't identify. So the question there is, why can't they identify them? It could be that it's some kind of stealth UFO that has alien technology, or Chinese or Russian technology that's doing these things.
I've heard that,
or it could be that the pilots themselves have some kind of issue with the way they are trained, or just a simple cognitive thing, or some instrument issues, something like that. It doesn't have to be one or the other. It could be both. It could be that 95% of these things are operator and equipment error, and a small percentage are things like Chinese drones, for example. So they're looking into this issue, and these are serious issues that deserve looking into. But on top of that, people have kind of layered this veneer of, it's aliens. They're investigating aliens. They're looking to see if aliens are visiting us or not. And they've got all this evidence that aliens are visiting. There's nothing like that is going on. We see unidentified things naturally. We will see unidentified things because if something's too far away, you can't identify it. So I think the report will just talk about that type of thing. It will list various incidents that happened in the past. It will list things that were identified, hopefully, and it will talk about recommendations for procedures for both recording the incidents and improving our identification of these things in the future.
God, this is great. And I got to tell folks that metabunk.org, I mean, go to metabunk.org, because this is just a small part of what they have on there. I've been looking around on the site, Mick. I mean, this is great. I mean, it's a lot of fun, very informative, very interesting stuff on here. And again, this type of perspective deserves and needs exposure, and I'm glad to do what little bit that I can here. And I want to get you back on to talk about this or some of the other issues that are often discussed on metabunk.org. Mick, just a closing comment. Anything you want to say here before I let you go from this edition of Podcast by George?
Well, keep an open mind. I think a lot of people want to believe a certain thing, but just because a certain explanation seems like the most attractive, it unfortunately does not mean that's the most likely explanation. So I'm not the enemy here. I'm trying to figure out what things are, and you're trying to figure out what things are, and I think the military is trying to figure out what things are. So let's all try to figure it out together and not fight over the details. I think we can all get along in UFO world.
That's great. Let's get to the truth. Folks, that's Mick West of metabunk.org. And Mick, again, thanks for coming on Podcast by George.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
And folks, if you like Podcast by George, as I always tell everyone, go to podcastbygeorge.com, pick the platform that you'd like to follow us on. You can watch us on YouTube and Facebook, two excellent places to see the videos. And of course, the audio's available just about everywhere, including iTunes. We're on Prime Video, Prime Audio, Spotify, places like that. Any place that podcasts are seen or heard. But that's going to do it. That's going to wrap it up. That's all there is. And there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.